Hey everyone, this is Natalie Ivey, the host of the HR Investigations podcast. In today's show, I'm going to discuss something that is so important, your own self-care as an HR, employee relations, or an ethics professional. Look, managing employee relations and dealing with employee complaints is tough. It's time-consuming, and on some days, just really darned hard and mentally draining. I'm going to share some tips and best practices to help you recharge and prioritize to reduce your stress and improve your state of well-being.
Welcome to the HR Investigations podcast, exploring the issues, challenges, strategies, and solutions. Sponsored by RPCHR and hosted by Natalie Ivey, an HR consultant, licensed PI, and author of the best-selling book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical guide for human resource professionals. And now, here's Natalie.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's show. I'm Natalie Ivey, and I'm so glad to have you with me. For my regular listening audience, you've probably noticed I've been away for a little while. I took some much-needed time off, and actually that's the topic for today's show, HR recharge and also prioritizing yourself. So the reason I want to focus on this is that I've observed firsthand the toll that managing employee issues can have on professionals. Well, let me share some of my observations. Well, what I'm seeing is a lot of professionals just struggling to just managing their increasing workloads. They're also dealing with continual distractions. I mean, of course, there are many emails, text messages, IMs, phone calls, Zoom meetings, and it seems like just about every moment of every day is just filled with something on one's calendar. And on top of then having to manage employee relations cases and investigations. A lot of senior leadership, especially in HR and ER, look, some of them are just not necessarily equipped with the right leadership and negotiating skills to effectively manage their departments. And what I'm talking about is specifically managing up to the C-suite and even senior leadership to get the necessary resources they need to run their departments effectively. So here's an example. So professional contact of mine, he's been an investigator for nearly 20 years, and he suddenly found himself working for a new boss. Well, this new boss was definitely not a fit for this role in HR. And this was a kind of a director/VP level role in HR, called director, but it operated a little bit more like a VP. But over a period of about 8 months of her leadership, 3 of the team members, who are all working cases in ER, elected to retire. Why? They grew pretty weary of her kind of, I don't want any excuses, kind of snarky type of leadership style. She was a typical weak, incompetent leader. She was definitely in over her head. Quite frankly, she really didn't come to the table in getting that promotion because she was really a very seasoned investigator. There were some political ramifications regarding why she got the job, but that's maybe for another day. Nevertheless, what she did was take on a position where she was clearly in over her head. Instead of identifying that she really needed some mentorship and some guidance, instead, she just kind of dug in her heels and just continued to push downward, if you will, onto her team. In other words, she just didn't listen to her team members when they said they were really, really getting stretched beyond capacity with working their cases. She would just, in some of her emails to them, an example, she would say things like, I get it, in all capital letters. I know we had 3 people retire, but we still have our team metrics to meet. Okay, she was just kind of completely tuning out her team, ignoring something vitally important, resources, and specifically having adequate human resources to be able to handle the volume on the team. Look, she just expected the team to just keep absorbing the workload. Well, maybe from, her perspective, she's looking like a hero to the higher ups because she cut the budget by about a half million, of course, with those 3 retirements. If you think about base comp bonuses and whatnot, yeah, it was probably close to a $500,000. Here's the problem, though. Despite those investigators on the team having an average of maybe 12 to 15 cases a month, well, that's already a little bit insane. I got to tell you, it's insane. And I've even heard of some investigators working like 30 cases a month. That's to the point of like well beyond ridiculousness, like ridiculous. But again, maybe that's another podcast we'll talk about is caseload. But before the 3 investigators retired, the team was already feeling the pressure to keep up. It just got to that ridiculous point after those 3 retirements, because then the team got pushed into working 20 to 22 cases a month. And there was kind of no plan to go ahead and backfill those folks. No plan at all. Just kind of let the attrition happen. All right, well, when you consider the average, let's say, harassment or EEO type of case, a lot of times the actual like formal investigations can tell you those can often take 30 to 40 hours and or longer, right? If it's, requires traveling or whatnot. I'm giving you a rough average there, but if you kind of do the math in terms of workload for each investigator, wow. All right. Now, mind you, not every case is going to be 30 to 40 hours. Some are just going to be your kind of employee drama. You might have to work with a department manager and the employee who's unhappy, kind of mediate a solution and just, try to get them to mend fences and work together harmoniously. But nevertheless, these meetings, they still take time out of your schedule. Sometimes these are, a few hours. Nevertheless, the leader here, she was a complete failure, and her inability to kind of manage up and negotiate for the proper amount of resources her team needed, she just had this kind of top-down pressure on her team. I can tell you what happened with other team members is, and my professional contact, he wound up moving on. He was like, I'm done. Stick a fork in me. I am done. He gave a 2-week notice, and that kind of rocked everybody's world. They were not expecting it. And then he became the fourth retirement. All right. So what started happening here was the retention was just abysmal. And I wonder after, his departure, I never learned, the scoop after he left, but I just kind of wonder what happened to that poor team after that fourth retirement inside of, roughly a year. This episode is devoted to all of you in kind of recharging, reprioritizing. It's beginning of the year. And if some of you listening are currently in a situation where you might be one of those team members where you're experiencing a lack of resources, you're dealing with just a ton of stress, you're overwhelmed, you're just not quite sure what to do. Well, I recommend you gather some data. Really look at your workload and that of your colleagues who work with you. Talk with them about it. Maybe do a happy hour via Zoom if you're all working remotely, and get together at the end of the day and talk with them about how they're feeling. When you start to really gather the data on where your workload is, and you also have other team members that are similarly situated, all right, there is a little bit of that strength in numbers, right? The data isn't really lying regarding how many cases you're working, how many hours a week each of you are working to keep up, along with maybe other demands for your time as well. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, as I just mentioned, getting together and going to the boss and kind of pleading your case about like being stretched to capacity. Some of you are probably afraid to do that. You might really fear, oh man, you just don't know my boss, Natalie. Like if I go do that, this boss is going to think that I'm being difficult, or that of a team member or two, like that we just can't handle it with the workload. Or you may even perceive, some of you, that if you have this type of conversation with your boss, that maybe in some fashion you're being insubordinate. Okay, let me address that. That's absolutely not being insubordinate. Insubordination is when your boss gives you a directive and you just purposefully do not carry out that directive. That's being insubordinate. And when they give you something that is, not immoral or illegal to do, and you just don't carry it out. But just simply by bringing forth issues that are happening on the team, such as case volume, challenges that you're facing perhaps with a lack of resources, right? That's being proactive in managing your own career, right? And not suffering in silence. And also, it's being supportive of your boss by also not suffering in silence or kind of engaging in like passive-aggressive behavior. What I've seen some professionals do is when they're kind of feeling overwhelmed and stressed, and maybe they're working with a boss that's maybe not necessarily the best leader, what they'll do is kind of be nice to the boss's face. They'll kind of handle whatever tasks or assignments are given to them, cases. And then as soon as they get off a call with that boss or finish a meeting, they're now turning around and bad-mouthing that boss, kind of cursing about the workload, kind of bitching to anybody who will listen to them, family included. Now, if that's kind of the behavior that you've been demonstrating, you need to kind of hear me here. You need to recognize that you're part of the problem, right? You need to take some ownership of your current workload. You need to identify what is driving the caseload, right? Look for root causes. Maybe it's one particular manager that really is kind of creating more issues for you and your team. Ask yourself, how can I address that? What support can I get from my leadership to help me address that? You got to own it, right? The other thing is being proactive by calculating the time and hours worked for each case. So if you don't really have any data to work with, this is a really, really great starting point. Now, in another one of my episodes on my podcast, I talked about the documentation process and really the importance of keeping up with case notes and specifically having a log to really document your action steps. Like for every bit of interview prep, interviews, post-interview notes cleanup, the statement preparation, like witness statements, if you're doing formal statements, the emails, the follow-up, the meetings with legal, leadership, sitting down to do the investigation report and typing that out and getting that printed and reviewed. Look, all of these things, and when I'm working cases myself, I use our software here at RPC. We've been using HR Acuity for many, many years, and that's our preferred vendor for case management. But if you don't have software like that, then okay, you're doing it manually, but you could use a simple Excel sheet to keep track of that. So for each case, you keep an Excel sheet, and literally every phone call, every interview prep, every email, every interview you've conducted, the post-interview notes cleanup where you're synthesizing your notes into your documents of conversation or witness summaries, all of that stuff. You have to be accounting for your time. Well, why is that important? Because the data that you're collecting is going to really help you with a platform for negotiating some meaningful change. If you don't have the data, it's going to be a little bit harder for you to do it. So over time, you're going to develop historical data by case type, and then that's going to give you a good average of the time that it takes to work each case, and also by case type. Maybe you have harassment cases, sexual harassment, then you have other cases that might be conflict of interest, or an employee just kind of general code of conduct and unprofessional conduct cases or things like that. Over time, that data then is, as I said a moment ago, becomes that platform for meaningful change. You can then go to your boss, especially when you start to see things change. If from, let's say, last quarter to this quarter, you're seeing that your case volume is up 22%, you're way busier than you were last quarter. Or if you compare year over year, especially, you've got to start getting some of this historical data gathered, and then your team members need to be doing the same, right? This is really powerful when you have an entire team that is really following the same type of process. Now you can all together get together with the boss and say, here's the data, here's what's going on, here's the amount of time it's taking us, and by case type. Then you can also start to look at trend analysis. Why is it that maybe it is only a handful of managers that seems to be driving all your case volume, right? This is a way for you to look at root cause analysis, and maybe that's where you can start talking to the boss and negotiating for some training. You can start negotiating for maybe even executive coaching if it happens to be driven from maybe a C-suite executive or VP, right? Things like that. So let me summarize a few things I've said. So number one, you need to own your workload and how it's affecting you and that of your other team members. If there is a capacity problem where maybe you and your team members are stretched like way, way too thin, like well beyond bandwidth for what one human can do, okay, and if it's affecting you, you have to speak up. Suffering in silence isn't the answer. And if you're going to just continue to work harder, longer, faster in the hope that you're going to get caught up, let me tell you, that's not a very good strategy. All right, let me put it to you this way. All right, what if you knew you had to move out of your apartment on a Saturday, let's say the last day of the month? You couldn't get into your new place until, let's say, that very same day. All right, so it's got to be a big move on the same day. And if you're not out by 5 o'clock, you're going to be billed, let's say, for each hour that your household items haven't been moved out, okay? Would you be able to handle the move all by yourself? Even if you have a one-bedroom apartment? Of course not, right? You would have to really estimate how many helpers you're going to need based on the size of your apartment, all of your furnishings. If you just manage the move out all by yourself and you just kind of worked harder, faster, longer, okay, hey, that isn't really a strategy. It's really kind of a mathematical issue, right? How many trips to the moving truck will it take for one person to move all this stuff versus if I thought about realistically looking around my apartment and I look at what I've got to move, right? You're going to come to that realization that this really can't be done solo. When you kind of calculate the amount of boxes and furniture and lamps and stuff that you have to move, you realize you need some additional resources in order to meet that deadline, okay? So this is the same principle that I want to get across in an HR department, employee relations, or even an ethics department. You know, there's a certain workload and operational tempo, and without adequate resources, individually, the team members will be just like the one person to try to move out of the apartment, right? It would be a whole lot more efficient and effective to hire temporary labor, get it from the moving company, maybe go to a few friends or neighbors, buy them some pizza, some beer, or beverages of their choice, and, help you to get a boost in resources so that you're going to be able to handle that move out on time, right? The next point I want to summarize is also just your state of well-being. Look, when you're stretched too thin, it starts to show up in other parts of your life. You may find yourself kind of snapping at your spouse, your partner, your kids, if you have children, and suddenly maybe verbally just like exploding, kind of like the proverbial cork popping from a bottle of champagne. You've just had so much stress that's kind of built up that maybe it's the one day your kids just can't quite get it together to get out the door in the morning, and you can't find one of your son's shoes, and you just explode. And then you cause your son to cry and then, run in another room. Okay. Those are clues that your stress level is out of control, right? This is not good. This is not healthy. The other indicators, all right, some things that you need to kind of really get real with yourself here. The scale, all right? And I'm talking about, when you step on the scale in your bathroom and you're also checking out your clothes and stuff that you wore, 6 months ago just doesn't fit anymore. All right. Now, I'm not talking about just we ate too many of those cookies over the holiday time. What I'm talking about is, this is a period of time where you're recognizing that you're compromising. You're not getting to the gym. You're not making it to that yoga class. You're not getting out and doing your walking. You're getting home later and later. You're picking up fast food much more frequently because you're just too exhausted to cook. You're maybe having to rely on a family member to just, hey, let's stop and pick up just some fast food because, again, I'm too tired. I don't have time. And what you keep doing is it's that working harder, faster, longer, harder, faster, longer, harder, faster, longer. It's like the train is just barreling down the track. And at some point, you're kind of going off the rails. I'm unfortunately seeing this really show up. I interact every year with thousands of HR professionals in the things that I do. I mean, I speak at university symposiums, SHRM events, and variety of like corporate conferences where I'm brought in as a speaker, and just in general with our client base. I mean, I interact with a very large client base here with my company. 70% of the HR profession, that's the latest stat, is female. Only about 30% are guys. So what my observation is, and I'm speaking specifically to my listeners who are women, is there's a focus that women have on kind of tactically addressing dealing with a problem, right? Harder, faster, longer, harder, faster, longer. Well, let me just go in earlier. Let me just stay a little later. Let me just shut my phone off and let me hunker down and let me not be distracted. And I'll get this report knocked out, or I'll get this interview summary finished. So that's kind of what I see a lot of women do. Now, I'm generalizing, of course, but I'm also talking specifically some of you who are more junior level professionals where you're doing the casework day in and day out. Maybe you're an employee relations rep or you're an HR manager. You're not necessarily thinking about that negotiating upwards and managing upwards with your boss, big picture, to really change your circumstances. You just kind of feel like if the boss gives you stuff to do, well, I just have to do it, without kind of thinking about how that's stretching you beyond capacity, right? The men in our profession over the years, what I observe is that they tend to be better. Now, there are some I've certainly seen over the years that maybe are not necessarily as skilled, but I will tell you, by and large, I see the men in our profession much more willing to negotiate. They'll set boundaries. And as one friend of mine, his name is Michael. Michael's a Texan. He has a bit of a baritone voice, kind of a low voice. He sounds a little like Trace Adkins, who's the country singer. And automatically, when Michael speaks, he sounds a bit more assertive. He's kind of naturally gifted with that kind of deep voice. But he negotiates this way. So let's say the boss is giving him like a project that he's going to need to lead and a rollout over a period of a couple of months. But he's already overseeing, let's say, an HR department, and there's a fairly high volume of employee relations issues and complaints this team has to manage. What he'll say is stuff like, okay, boss, all right, I know this project rollout is really important and I support it. You know that. However, to fully support it, boss, and to maintain our current metrics, well, let me lay out what I think I'm going to need here. And I'm going to have to think about it a little bit more, but just right here at a high level, I'm going to need X, Y, and Z. You see how that sounds? Okay. So this is very much communicating with the boss on the boss's level to just share. Number one, he's clearly stating that he supports the boss and whatever this project may be, but that he also is going to need something from the boss. He's beginning to negotiate here to ensure that he maintains the current level of productivity with his team, but that he also wants to support the project, right? That's very much speaking from that position of strength and managing up, and not just kind of, oh, well, I just have to take whatever the boss gave me. All right. What a lot of women may do in Michael's same scenario is just sort of agree with the boss and say, okay, boss, wow, it's going to be a big project. And wow, I support it. Wow, this will be great. And it's kind of like, great, but you're going to just put that chipper face on. And then, the boss doesn't get any information on the current productivity levels with the team and how the new project may affect it. It's that kind of suffering in silence. So then when maybe the project rollout starts to happen, and now let's say a female team member I was just talking about who didn't really assertively manage up and negotiate for maybe more resources, what happens is now she's pushed into working ridiculous hours, is stressed out, work deadlines are getting done, but just in the nick of time. Now there's kind of this resentment that's building, and now it's even towards the boss. However, who really is to kind of blame here for the stress level going up, right? Yeah, a little bit on the boss's part for not asking. Hey, leaders really need to be saying, hey, what do you think you're going to need in order to support the project but still maintain our case volume, right? And meet our metrics. But there is some serious ownership on the team member's part for not really kind of managing up, all right? So a lot of what happens with professionals that get into these situations where they're really stretched to capacity, it really kind of starts with being able to do what Michael did, right? And be able to negotiate. Now, I'm not suggesting that you get a Trace Atkins really baritone voice to have to do that. But, what I'm saying is that you really have got to think about it. And in the moment, if you're really not sure what the response needs to be, you might then want to put a placeholder with the boss and say, well, boss, I really support this. I think this is going to be great for the team. Give me a day or so, and I want to really evaluate what the impact may be on the team and our ability to meet our metrics. At a high level here, I'm thinking about that we may need to look at some even temporary resources. I don't really have that figured out just yet, but I just kind of want to go on record in saying that I might need to come back to you here for some resources in order for us to manage it all. All right. That's kind of the approach that we need to be taking. But too often, the stress level just continues to get worse and worse because there's not a level of assertiveness and managing up with the boss to make the boss aware that there could be kind of catastrophic failure on the team, quite frankly. So in summary, for this episode, in order for you to kind of recharge and take control over your state of well-being, you first have to be honest with yourself. You then really need to size your workload and capacity issues and be prepared with facts and stats to share with your boss. Also get a few allies. Go talk with your team members who are in the same boat as you. What are they feeling? Or is it only you? Hey, if it's only you and your team members seem to be keeping their head above water just fine, then that might be something where you need to do some comparisons, right? Then also come up with some workable solutions. Even if interim support may be needed, like borrowing a team member from another department or even getting some external temporary help. And then also recognize that perhaps your own shortcomings, right? If you know that you are someone who kind of just does that suffer in silence and then you grit your teeth and you just keep working harder, faster, longer, okay, look, that's not really helping you. It's negatively affecting you and definitely increasing your stress level. And also, lastly, I want to share some advice that I got from a mentor of mine. His name was Neil. And I worked for him many years ago. But he said, don't push a bad position for too long. And what Neil meant by that is that if you really have done your level best to influence those in leadership up your chain of command and you've presented ideas that are workable solutions, but you're just dealing with some weak leadership. Look, they just don't have your back and they're not giving you what the team needs. And they're really kind of pushing down on you. Like I talked about the weak leader, earlier where, my friend finally packed it in and he was the fourth retirement under her leadership. All right. You don't want to push a bad position like that too long. Identify other opportunities. Look at other organizations. Evaluate their cultures. Maybe try to talk with a few people who work at that organization before you make the leap. What you don't want to do is go from frying pan into fire, right? Where it gets even worse in another organization. But you need to make sure that you really have an understanding of what workload really is. It's ridiculous in some of these positions that you're working 60 to 65 hours a week just to keep up, just to maintain status quo, right? That's ridiculous. And I'm finding that it's almost becoming the norm a little bit in our profession that this is just kind of acceptable. Yet, organizations are continually promoting their work-life balance. What a joke. It's laughable in some organizations today. It really is, starting with those of you who are listening who are in leadership positions, maybe director, VP level. I'm speaking to you too. Some of you may recognize what I've talked about in this episode. Maybe you don't necessarily have your team's back like you should. Check in with your team. Now's the time. Next team meeting. Hey, do you have what you need from me? What do you need? And then start figuring it out and then negotiating for that. You've got to figure it out. A leader has to provide the team with the necessary resources. And for those of you who are the front line, or you're in maybe even an HR manager or employee relations manager role, then you've got to really evaluate what's going on with your own workload and what's going on with kind of your stress level. What things are really causing you a great deal of grief? And you just have to be willing to set some very specific goals and negotiate your way out of it. Okay, that's it for me today. I hope that I've given you some great food for thought here at the beginning of the year so you can begin to assess your situation and begin negotiating for some meaningful and positive change. And also, speaking of that, I have some really exciting things that I want to share with you. This is exciting, really exciting for me. I've been working on it, and I'm finally ready to launch the second edition of my book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical guide for human resource professionals. So it is off now to my editor and my publishing company. And so I'm looking at a launch time sometime in the latter part of April. So stay tuned on that. The other thing that I'm super excited about is that I'm soon going to be offering the How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical workshop for HR and also, of course, employee relations professionals. And so that will be taking place after the book launch. And so my calendar will be uploaded with dates where you can sign up for training. There will be virtual classes as well as some on-site classes in the beautiful sunny Daytona Beach, my hometown. And also there's some other exciting things that are coming up as well. A new website at rpchr.com, and we're going to be launching an RPC Academy where you can have access to content, all of my content, exciting stuff. So I'm really happy about it. More details will be forthcoming. All right, until next time on the HR Investigations podcast. See ya.
Thanks for joining us today on the HR Investigations podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share the show with any colleagues who will benefit from our strategies and solutions. For free bonus resources, simply visit hr-investigations.com. And remember, if you'd like some help with improving your investigative skills, or if your organization is in need of an external investigator to help with a case, please get in touch with us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.